Tony Bennett seemed like the nicest guy in music. He worked with everyone from Lady Gaga to Frank Sinatra. But behind those smiling photos was a dark secret. For decades, he carried hatred for one singer that ate at him daily. Even his closest friends didn't know the truth. When Bennett was near death in 2021, he finally broke his silence. This wasn't just professional jealousy. This was personal, bitter, and had been hidden for over 50 years. Anthony Dominic Benedetto was born on August 3, 1926, at St. John's Hospital in Long Island City, Queens. It was the first time anyone in his family had been born in a hospital. A small but meaningful change for an Italian immigrant family that had always relied on home births. His parents had come from Italy in search of a better life. But what they found in New York was poverty and constant struggle. Their apartment in Astoria was crowded and cold, with coal stoves barely keeping them warm. Food was never certain, and Tony later remembered that a hot meal was not guaranteed in those days. Tony's father worked long hours as a grocer in Astoria, but his health was fragile. Years of poverty and labor had left him with a serious heart condition, and without life insurance, every setback weighed heavily on the family. Neighbors knew the Benedettos for their resilience, but they also saw how John's illness and the constant need for money kept the family close to collapse. In 1936, when Tony was just 10 years old, tragedy struck. John Benedetto died at the age of 50, leaving Anna alone to care for Tony, his older sister Mary, and his brother, John Jr. The Great Depression had already left the city on edge, and now the family faced poverty more severe than before. Anna found work as a seamstress in a sweatshop, sewing piece after piece for long hours and meager pay. Rent was a constant worry, and Tony recalled times when the landlord threatened to evict them or when their furniture was taken away because they couldn't keep up with payments. Soup kitchens became part of their weekly routine. Though the loss of his father was devastating, it gave Tony a sense of compassion and humility that never left him. That same year, Tony had an experience that showed just how extraordinary his talent was. At the age of 10, he was chosen to sing at the opening of the Triborough Bridge on July 11, 1936. The bridge, a $60 million project that connected 3 boroughs of New York, was one of the city's great achievements. Standing there, a small boy on a massive stage, Tony sang before a crowd that included Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia himself. The mayor even patted him on the head afterward. It was a moment that Tony never forgot, proof that his voice could carry him beyond the struggles of his daily life. At 13, the need to support his family pushed him into work. He became a singing waiter in Italian restaurants around Queens and Long Island City. Dressed in a worn white jacket, he served plates of pasta and pizza before stepping up to sing for the customers. His voice, rich and controlled even at that age, soon became the talk of the neighborhood. Patrons thought he was simply a talented boy, but the truth was that every note he sang helped put bread and milk on the table at home. Tony later said he learned more about people and music in those restaurants than anywhere else. The experience shaped his natural, conversational style and taught him humility in the face of hardship. Tony's artistic side also showed early. He was accepted into the School of Industrial Art in Manhattan, a place known for shaping young talent in painting and design. Even before high school, he had been known at PS 141 as the class caricaturist, sketching classmates and teachers with a sharp eye. At the School of Industrial Art, he dreamed of a career as a commercial artist. Surrounded by creative energy in Manhattan, he honed his discipline and deepened his love for art. Later in life, he credited those years with influencing not only his painting, but also the way he approached music. But dreams had to wait. At 16, Tony dropped out of school to help his family survive. He found work as a copy boy at the Associated Press, and later as a grocery clerk and elevator operator. The jobs paid little, but every dollar mattered. Despite the grind, he never gave up on singing. He performed at amateur nights in local clubs and theaters, feeding a passion that hardship could not extinguish. In 1944, at the age of 18, Tony was drafted into the United States Army. He served with the 63rd Infantry Division during the final stages of World War II, fighting in France and Germany. The war was brutal, and he faced combat firsthand. When he could, he sang with military bands, bringing moments of comfort to soldiers living through the horror. The Battle of the Bulge left a mark on him forever. Nearly 19,000 American soldiers were killed, and Tony witnessed friends die and villages destroyed. He remembered freezing nights in foxholes and the constant fear of being surrounded by German troops. These experiences turned him into a lifelong advocate for peace and justice. After the war, the GI Bill gave Tony the chance to study music seriously. He enrolled at the American Theater Wing School, where he trained under vocal coach Mimi Spear. One piece of advice from her changed everything. She told him not to imitate singers, but to learn from instrumentalists. Inspired by jazz musicians like Art Tatum and Billie Holiday, Tony developed a style that was his own. In 1949, the smoky clubs of Greenwich Village were alive with music, but few could imagine that one small stage would launch a legend. Anthony Dominic Benedetto, performing under the name Joe Barry, was struggling through sets night after night, hoping for a chance that seemed far away. Then, by pure chance, Pearl Bailey walked into the Village Inn. She was already a star, known for her warmth and power, and she listened closely as he sang. Something about his phrasing and emotion stopped her cold. That very evening, she made a decision that changed his life. She invited him to open her show, placing him in front of an audience that would finally see what she had seen in him. It was not only an act of kindness, but a bold step, given the deeply divided world of entertainment after the war. Pearl Bailey didn't just share her stage, she shared her connections, introducing him to people who could make a difference. That single night set off a chain of events that would soon bring Bob Hope into his path. Not long after Bailey's endorsement, Bob Hope himself slipped into a nightclub where Bennett was singing. Hope was one of America's most famous entertainers, a man with the power to make or break careers. Bennett later remembered pouring his heart into the performance, unaware of who was in the audience. When the set ended, Hope did something unusual. He came backstage. Hope told the young singer, "You have something very special. I'm going to put you on my show." It was a promise few performers ever heard, and for Bennett, it was the moment everything changed. Hope invited him to open his upcoming show at the Paramount Theater in New York, a stage where giants like Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby had performed. To a young singer fresh out of village clubs, it felt like stepping straight into history. Before that Paramount debut, Hope made one more suggestion. He told him the name Joe Barry wouldn't work. His real name, Anthony Benedetto, was too long for the marquee. On the spot, Hope suggested something shorter, something the world would remember: Tony Bennett. It was a simple change, but one that carried weight. In an industry where a name could mean everything, the new identity opened doors. Bennett would later say he owed that name and the career it made possible to Bob Hope. The Paramount shows in late 1949 proved to be the true turning point. Thousands of fans packed the theater, and Bennett had to learn quickly how to handle the kind of crowds that once caused Sinatra riots. He admitted it was intimidating, but he also said those nights taught him how to control a performance, how to pace himself, and how to command a room The exposure sent his name across the country, and record companies began to take notice. It wasn't long before Columbia Records came calling. In 1950, he signed with the label, joining the ranks of the biggest stars in music. Under the guidance of producer Mitch Miller, Bennett shaped his style into something unique. He once said Miller taught him to focus on every note and every phrase, to sing with pure emotion rather than just melody. Recording at Columbia's studio on 7th Avenue, Bennett began a partnership that would last nearly 6 decades and lead to more than 70 albums and 50 million records sold around the world. The first breakthrough came in 1951 with Because of You. Released in April, it slowly climbed the charts until, on July 14th, it reached number 1. It stayed there for 10 weeks, a remarkable run that turned Bennett into a household name. The song sold over 1 million copies, earning him a gold disc and launching him onto television screens and into a whirlwind of tours. Audiences connected with its sincerity, and critics credited Bennett with reviving the classic pop ballad at a time when other styles were taking over. That same year, Bennett proved his versatility by recording Hank Williams's Cold, Cold Heart. The idea of a New York pop singer covering a country hit was almost unheard of, but his version struck gold. It held the number 1 spot for 6 weeks and sold over 1 million copies. Even Hank Williams himself praised the recording, saying it brought his music to audiences who had never heard it before. With that song, Bennett bridged a cultural divide, showing that music could cross boundaries and unite listeners. Then, in 1953, Bennett delivered the song that would define him for decades. Rags to Riches soared to number 1 on October 24th and stayed there for 8 weeks. Its lyrics of triumph and hope matched the spirit of post-war America, and audiences embraced it as an anthem of the American dream. The single sold more than 2 million copies, and years later it would appear in films like Goodfellas and The Godfather, ensuring its place in popular culture. Bennett himself said it was the song most often requested by fans, even decades later. By 1965, Bennett had scored an extraordinary 24 singles in the top 40, a feat few could match. Songs like Stranger in Paradise, Blue Velvet, and Just in Time kept him at the top of the charts year after year. Even when the Beatles were dominating American music in 1964, Bennett's When Joanna Loved Me still made its way onto the charts, proving his ability to withstand changing tides. He explained his success simply, saying he loved singing songs people remembered, and that was enough to keep him on top. Tony Bennett's work with jazz legends was nothing short of groundbreaking. When he started recording with Count Basie in the mid-1950s, he left behind the safe, polished pop sound that had made him famous. The sessions with Stan Getz were especially daring. At first, Getz didn't want to perform with a pop singer, but that changed the moment he heard Bennett improvise during rehearsal. The collaboration with Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers shocked the music world even more. Many believed Blakey's hard bop style could never fit with Bennett's smooth voice, yet together they created some of the most innovative jazz vocals of the era. Bobby Hackett, one of the greatest cornet players, once said that Bennett was the only pop singer who could swing like an instrument instead of just singing over the band. These projects were not just experiments. They marked a complete transformation, one that put his commercial success at risk in the name of artistry. In 1957, he released an album called The Beat of My Heart. It was his way of breaking free from the pop music machine, even though Columbia Records warned him not to do it. The record featured giants of jazz drumming, including Art Blakey, Chico Hamilton, and Joe Jones, each bringing their own sound. The sessions were recorded live with almost no overdubs, capturing the real energy of jazz. At first, critics dismissed it as too experimental, and sales were modest, with only 50,000 copies sold in the first year. But its influence was far greater than the numbers. On one track, Lullaby of Broadway, Bennett scattered alongside the band, something almost unheard of at the time. The album later earned praise from Frank Sinatra, who admitted it taught him how to swing. Just a year later, in 1958, Bennett and Count Basie recorded Basie Swings, Bennett Sings. At first, Basie didn't want to do it, saying Bennett was too pretty for his hard-swinging band. That changed one night at Birdland in New York, when Bennett joined the orchestra and delivered such a powerful version of Pennies from Heaven that the whole club was stunned. The album was recorded in only 3 days that January, with a full 16-piece band. The opener, Jeepers Creepers, had Bennett trading riffs with the horn section in a playful back and forth that had never been attempted on a commercial record. It was a huge success, selling more than 250,000 copies in its first year. Years later, studio tapes revealed that Bennett had rewritten many of the vocal arrangements during the sessions, inventing new melodies as the tape rolled. Basie himself admitted that this was the only vocal album where he felt the singer was truly part of his band. Then came the song that would define his career. On January 23, 1962, Bennett recorded I Left My Heart in San Francisco at Columbia's 30th Street studio. He had nearly skipped it. The song had been sitting on his piano for 8 months after he called it too sentimental. On the day of the session, he arrived with laryngitis and could barely speak. The orchestra had to lower the key twice to fit his strained voice. Yet in just 2 takes, he delivered a performance that turned the song into history. Its emotional depth was partly due to the rasp in his voice that day. The single reached number 19 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed on the charts for 36 weeks. By 1963, it had sold more than 1 million copies and earned him his first gold record. It won 2 Grammy Awards, including Record of the Year, a rare honor for a jazz-influenced song at the time. In 1969, San Francisco adopted it as the city's official theme song. But the world of music soon changed, and with it, Bennett's fortunes. The arrival of the Beatles in 1964 marked a new era. Rock music dominated the airwaves, and Columbia Records pushed Bennett to adapt. In 1970, he reluctantly released Tony Singh's The Great Hits of Today, which featured Beatles covers and a psychedelic album cover that clashed with his image. The project was a disaster. He admitted he felt physically ill just recording it. Rock fans ignored it, his loyal audience hated it, and he was left in between worlds. His record sales, once so strong, collapsed as his sound was pushed aside in a world screaming for something new. His personal life was no less turbulent. In 1952, Bennett married Patricia Beach, a 19-year-old art student. The wedding at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York drew a bizarre scene outside. 2,000 women dressed in black with veils, mourning as if at a funeral. 2 sons soon followed, Danny in 1954 and Day in 1955. But Bennett's constant touring left Patricia feeling abandoned, and by 1965 they had separated after 13 years of marriage. The scandal deepened in 1969 when Patricia filed for divorce, citing his affair with actress Sandra Grant, which had begun 4 years earlier. When the divorce became final in 1971, Bennett married Sandra that same December. The quick transition shocked his fans, and his image as the clean-cut crooner was forever altered. Things worsened when he left Columbia Records in 1972 after a bitter dispute. He turned down their demands for more rock covers, ending a 20-year partnership. He briefly recorded for MGM's Verve division, releasing only 2 albums before deciding to start his own label, Improv, in 1975. Though he produced 5 albums, including collaborations with Bill Evans, the label collapsed by 1977 due to poor distribution and money troubles. For the first time, Bennett had no recording contract. His finances crumbled. The collapse of improv left him with heavy debts, while the lifestyle he shared with Sandra in Los Angeles was far beyond what his shrinking income could support. By 1977, the IRS was threatening to seize his home over massive unpaid taxes. That same year, his mother, Anna, died on Thanksgiving night, while he was preparing to perform at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. The loss sent him into a deep depression, and cocaine became his escape. Sandra later revealed that his drug use nearly killed him. By the late 1970s, he was a shadow of himself, playing small shows in Las Vegas just to survive. In 1979, Bennett came terrifyingly close to death. Overwhelmed by debt, grief, and addiction, he overdosed on cocaine while taking a bath. Sandra found him unconscious in the tub, the water overflowing. She performed chest compressions and managed to revive him before rushing him to the hospital. He later described the moment as a near-death experience, saying he saw a golden light that filled him with peace. When he woke up, he felt it was divine intervention, a sign that he had been given a second chance. It became the turning point that pushed him to quit drugs completely and fight for a comeback. In 1979, Tony Bennett reached the lowest point of his career. At 53 years old, he nearly lost his life to a cocaine overdose and was drowning in debt. He owed $2 million in back taxes to the IRS, who were threatening to take his house. In desperation, he called his sons Danny and Day and admitted, "Look, I'm lost here. It seems like people don't want to hear the music I make." What made the call so unexpected was that Danny and Day had been members of a failed rock band called Quacky Duck and his Barnyard Friends. On paper, they were the last people anyone would expect to save a legendary singer. But Danny quickly realized that while he didn't have the voice for music, he had a sharp business mind. And his father had the talent, but lacked financial sense. Danny immediately began cutting down expenses and moved Tony back to New York. That decision would become the starting point of one of the greatest comebacks in entertainment history. Danny's approach to his father's career was bold and surprising. Instead of chasing popular trends, he moved Tony away from the Las Vegas image that had become stale. He booked him at colleges and small theaters, reaching younger audiences who had never heard American standards performed live. In 1986, Danny brought his father back to Columbia Records, the same label that had dropped him in 1971. But this time, Tony had full creative control. The first album from this deal, The Art of Excellence, became his first charting record since 1972. Danny also set up collaborations with unlikely partners, including rock bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, which opened doors to entirely new audiences. By 1990, the IRS debt was fully paid, and Tony Bennett's career was firmly back on track. Even during his struggles in the 1970s, Tony never stopped exploring his love for jazz. He worked closely with pianist Bill Evans, releasing the Tony Bennett-Bill Evans album in 1975. The record showed a side of Bennett few had seen before, with Evans's delicate playing drawing out some of Tony's most thoughtful and refined performances. Their connection was so strong that they recorded together again in 1977. Critics praised these sessions for their honesty and intimacy, even though they didn't sell well at the time. Bennett also performed with jazz greats like Ruby Braff and George Barnes, and these projects, though overlooked then, would later be recognized as some of his best work. In 1994, at the age of 68, Bennett stunned the music world by appearing on MTV's Unplugged. The show was known for grunge and alternative acts, not classic crooners. But the performance turned into the second highest rated episode in the show's history. The live album went platinum, selling over 1 million copies, and in 1995, it won the Grammy Award for Album of the Year. It was only the fourth live album ever to win that honor. The performance included memorable duets with K.D. Lang and Elvis Costello. And when Bennett told the audience, "Let's do this without a microphone," the rawness of his voice captured the spirit of the show perfectly. Away from the stage, Bennett's personal life took a surprising turn. In 2007, he married Susan Crowe, a woman 40 years younger than him. The connection was almost fate. He had first met her parents in the 1960s, when her mother was pregnant with Susan. The two met in the 1980s after a concert when she was 19 and he was nearly 60. She later became president of his fan club, and after dating for 2 decades, they married in a private New York ceremony on June 21, 2007. At the time, Bennett was 81 and Susan was 48. He admitted that the age gap had been hard to ignore in the beginning, but said they soon realized they shared so many interests that it no longer mattered. She remained by his side through his final years and cared for him after his Alzheimer's diagnosis. In 2006, as he turned 80, Bennett released Duets, an American classic. The album debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200, selling more than 202,000 copies in its first week. The record featured Paul McCartney, Elton John, Barbra Streisand, Stevie Wonder, Billy Joel, Bono, and Tim McGraw. Unlike many duet albums, Bennett recorded each song in person with his collaborators. The album proved that American standards could still shine in a modern music world. 5 years later, in 2011, Bennett released Duets de Fifine So Satisfied. At 85 years old, he became the oldest living artist ever to debut at number 1 on the Billboard 200. The album sold 179,000 copies in its first week and included performances with Lady Gaga, Mariah Carey, Norah Jones, John Mayer, Aretha Franklin, Carrie Underwood, and a posthumous duet with Amy Winehouse. It was Winehouse's final recording before her death, and their version of Body and Soul was deeply moving. Danny called the album's success historic, proving his father had never lost his artistic power. In 2014, Bennett and Lady Gaga teamed up again for Cheek to Cheek. At 88, he earned another number 1 album with 131,000 copies sold in the first week. The project was filled with jazz standards by composers like Cole Porter and George Gershwin. Their tour and the PBS special Cheek to Cheek Live became cultural events, and the concert at Lincoln Center was the first ever streamed in 4K. The album produced 2 number 1 singles on the Jazz Digital Songs chart and showed that jazz still had a place in the modern age. Throughout his career, Bennett won 20 Grammy Awards, including the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2001. He was the only artist to win Grammys over a span of 50 years, starting with his 1962 win for I Left My Heart in San Francisco and continuing through his final Grammy in 2022 at age 95. That win came for Love for Sale, his second collaboration with Lady Gaga, which earned Best Traditional Pop Vocal Album. Most of his Grammy victories came after he turned 60, defying industry expectations about age. In 1999, Tony and Susan founded the Frank Sinatra School of the Arts in Astoria, Queens, where Tony had grown up. The school opened in 2001 with 250 students and later moved to a permanent building in 2009. It offered world-class facilities, from a 750-seat concert hall to dance and art studios, and consistently maintained high graduation rates. The school became a symbol of Bennett's belief that arts education could change young lives. In 2021, the public learned that Bennett had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2016. For 5 years, his family had kept the news private. Despite the illness, he continued to perform 90-minute concerts flawlessly, astonishing his doctors. His neurologist explained that while Bennett had trouble recognizing objects, his musical memory remained sharp, Lady Gaga later revealed that he had always disliked Martin Scorsese's portrayal of Italians in his films, even though Scorsese had used his music in classics like Goodfellas. That same year, Bennett released his final album, Love for Sale, at 95 years old. It was a tribute to Cole Porter and made him the oldest person in history to release an album of new material. The record debuted at number 8 on the Billboard 200, and the 59 years between that album and his first top 10 record in 1962 set a new record. The sessions were emotional, with Lady Gaga moved to tears as she watched her friend deliver powerful vocals despite his illness. On July 21, 2023, Tony Bennett passed away peacefully in Manhattan at the age of 96, just 2 weeks before his 97th birthday. He had released more than 70 albums, sold over 50 million records, and won 19 competitive Grammys, most of them later in life. His family remembered him as a man who always found joy in singing. From his early days as a singing waiter in Queens to his final performances in 2021. The Alzheimer's Association praised him as a champion for the cause, noting that even in his final years, he continued to inspire people with his voice and his heart.